Hello, hello, hello. See if people can hear me. All right, so it looks like we're good. All right, so what's up, everybody? So I just wanted to come live and maybe just do a follow up from the last live I did, which isn't uploaded right now. I'm having to go back and edit out some glitches as a result of the fact that the latency was, I think, low whenever I was live last time with Chuck Littleton and Keisha King. Um, I think I got those bugs, those little jitters worked out though. It turns out that my internet was no good. I had the lowest possible speed, and I didn't realize that until my wife told me. And so I went ahead and upgraded to the best possible internet speed for my area. And hopefully, I don't have these continued issues that I have been having with my connection. Not only with the connection, but also the picture. I noticed that oftentimes when I have people on my show, sometimes their picture isn't coming through very clear, and sometimes even the audio is very spotty. So let me know as this show goes on whether or not you can tell a difference between this one and the other ones I've done in the past, just with regard to the picture quality and the connection and so on. So, what do I want to talk about today? So, what I want to talk about today is how I've noticed a kind of subtle trend building up, bubbling up amongst some liberals in terms of the question as to whether or not people should be having children. Because for the past century, liberals, at least the intellectual ones, have been beating on this drum of population control. At first, they were very loud and proud about it. They weren't very secretive about it. I mean, they've had eugenics leagues, and their whole premise was look, the world is overpopulated. There's scarcity as it is, and there's just no way that all these people can be cared for. And so it's up to us to find a way to roll back the population growth and try to preserve uh, all of life's resources for the people who are already here and to, in a sense, develop humanity um, to be better than what it is. So that way, the future uh, is only populated by the most gentry of citizens. And so they saw it fit to exterminate people they deemed undesirable, people who were poor, minorities, crippled people, obese people, people who didn't fit a certain criteria for what they, the eugenicists, believed to be upstanding, to be the gentry of society, the cream of the crop, so to speak. And, you know, you can use your own imagination as to what they believe to be the cream of the crop. And so, obviously, um, their initial crusade was met with a lot of disdain. It was met with uh, a very resounding rejection, particularly from the Christian community, because here you have these atheist scientists and movers and shakers who don't believe in God, and they're taking it to the next level of we want to build our own heaven on earth. In order to build our heaven on earth, we have to weed out the people we deem undesirable. And so naturally, Christians didn't think very highly of that. And so they were met with a lot of rejection and a lot of uh, basically people denouncing them. And so what they resolved to do is to be a little bit more secretive with their agenda, to be a little bit more clandestine with their agenda. And so as you get into the 60s, population control shows up in various ways, including by the so-called uh, ecologists, the so-called environmentalists. This was the group of people, the individuals, who tried to make the case for population control by saying that we are ruining the earth by the mere fact of reproduction. In other words, the more children we have, the more we're destroying the climate. And so this crowd came to light, came to popularization in the 60s, and they've included their rhetoric throughout the 70s. They kind of went quiet, and then they reemerged in the 90s with the scare of global warming, right? And then, of course, they are beating their same drum today with the cry of climate change, or you know, whatever you want to call it. So anyway, now I'm starting to see them begin to kind of turn the tide, because there's a new set of circumstances that the Marxists and true Marxist fashion are basically going back to the drawing board and re-offering a narrative that they are hoping the public intellectuals will run with, because atheists, Marxists, they don't recognize truth. They don't recognize the harmony of truth. In other words, God's word remains the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? But because Marxists and atheists start from a subjective footing, they don't recognize anything as objective. They don't recognize anything as fixed and established, especially in the way of truth and morality. And so they get to kind of change their mind on a whim and then convince you that they never changed their mind, that in fact they've always been loyal and faithful to the science. And as the science presents new information, they adjust to that information because science is king. And this is the kind of rhetoric and semantics that they use to try to finagle themselves out of quite a fix. And here they find themselves in quite a fix because forever, once again, they've argued for eugenics, they've argued for population control, and now all of a sudden they're flipping the script and saying, well, we actually need to have children. But why are they saying that? Why are they saying that we need to have more children? Well, in order for a socialist society to sustain, you need people who are working. And to the extent that people aren't working, there's no way that your socialist utopia can survive and thrive. As America gets older and we're having less and less children, that means more people on Social Security. And if those people can't be, if their needs cannot be provided for them, if their health and or lack thereof cannot be accommodated by a younger quote unquote working class, then how can such a society sustain, especially in a country where it doesn't matter if there's a Democrat in office or a Republican office, the spending is always out of control. And this is why I don't really um, this is why I never believe a Republican politician when they say they're fiscally conservative, because the fact of the matter is one of the largest spending bills in the last decade was passed by none other than Donald Trump, who was a Republican president. And so this whole hogwash that Republicans are more fiscally conservative is it's just utter nonsense. The fact of the matter is, once you reach a certain level of being in political office, there's no such thing as quote unquote sides, because the fact of the matter is most of our politicians are bought and paid for by the globalist types, and what they're doing in the state or in the House of Representatives and in the Senate is kind of laying the groundwork for a globalist future. It certainly seems that way with our involvement in NATO, with our involvement in the UN, with our involvement in all of these other programs that we have no business being involved in. There's a lot of things that we're doing on the social front that is, again, chipping away at any kind of individuality, autonomy amongst our people. And we are training and indoctrinating our children in our public schools to be statists, to think in terms of not what must I do for myself and my family, how can I be resourceful. We're not training our children in our public schools to think that way. Rather, we're training our children to think like little statists. What can the government do for me? What kind of programs can be passed in office and congressional and executive office to help make life easier for the little man, right? And so we're not thinking in this kind of default way, this kind of innate way, as to how can I be resourceful? How can I figure this out? How can I elevate myself to the next level? We don't think that way. And the fact is, to the extent that there's people who do think that way, they're becoming fewer and further in between, especially if you are brought through America's public school system, public education system. You'll find that when it comes to the batch of students who are being homeschooled or who are receiving some kind of a classical curriculum, classical education, those students tend to be more resourceful when they get older. They tend to think more outside the box. Unfortunately, many of the kids who go to our public schools are not being trained to do such a thing. That's not to say that no one who's coming out of our public schools have that ability. I'm not saying that. Obviously, there are many exceptions to the rule. I like to think of myself as being an exception to the rule. I went to public school from K to 12, but I do have a lot of deficiencies as a result of going to public school and not being classically educated. Let me try to turn this audio up a little bit. Okay, so what do I mean when I say that leftists are beginning to shift their language, so to speak, to advocate subtly for people having more kids? Well, there was a piece that was written in Vox recently. And the author of this particular piece seems to be making the case, or the point rather, that many parents aren't having kids, specifically college-educated parents, the socially responsible parents. They're not having kids for fear that they are bringing in their offspring into a world that's already damaged due to human-involved climate change. And by adding more children to this world, what they're doing is they are increasing the carbon footprint and therefore being irresponsible. And so that has long been, and to this author, that has long been a problem. But he is here to reassure you, well, actually, you can have more kids because there's efforts being made to roll back emissions, to roll back our carbon footprint. And, we are on a road to net zero. And so with that being the case, actually, go ahead and have more kids. And his point, what's in the underbelly of what he's saying is like, please have more kids because we can't sustain our socialist society without kids, without young folks to, take on the baton in terms of continuing the workforce and being able to pay for all these social programs that we already don't have money to pay for. That's basically what he's saying, but he's using the climate change thing to say that historically we've been responsible, but let me give you some reassurance as to why you should probably tone it down a little bit on the climate change thing, because, on the one hand, we are making progress and advances when it comes to dealing with climate change. But on the other hand, we have all these social programs that we need to pay for. So, how about popping out a kid or two? So the Vox piece, let me see if I can't share it with you guys here. All right, so this is it. He titled his piece, "Yes, you can have kids and fight climate change at the same time. You don't say." Now, one of the things I want you all to notice about the very first paragraph here, let's read it together. It says, Let's get this out of the way first. I am not here to tell you to have children. I'm not your mother or your mother-in-law. I'm not the college classmate who posts endless photos of their prodigy on Instagram. I'm not your priest, your pastor, your rabbi, or your imam. I'm not going to tell you about all the joy you'll harvest as a parent or all the fun you'll pay in recompense. Have a Nick Cannon-sized family. Don't have any kids at all. Whatever, it's your life. So that's, of course, how he opens up the piece. Now, one of the things that stuck out to me, because he says that and then proceeds to spend the rest of the article telling you why you should have kids. Okay? So one of the things that stuck out to me when I read that very first paragraph in the piece is he's naming all of these people who are in one way or another an authoritative figure, a spiritual authoritative figure in people's lives. And he's trying to distinguish or differentiate himself from people you tend to go to for spiritual advice, whether it be your mother or your mother-in-law. He starts naming your priest, your rabbi, your pastor, your imam, whatever. So what he's doing is he's trying to differentiate. Look, you have all these people in your lives who are there to help you spiritually, but that's quackery. That's kind of, you have to read in between the lines. He's kind of tossing these people and their roles aside as quackery, and he's positioning himself or posturing himself as coming from a scientific perspective, right? As coming from a practical perspective. And so he's in a sense posturing people who he disagree with or disagree with their positioning, right? That he might then come in through the back door and say, but you can pay attention to me because I am just a guy who's writing an article in Vox from a scientific perspective, talking to you about climate change, talking to you about the progress that's being made and helping to fight climate change, and then reassuring you from there that it's actually good to have more kids. Okay, so is this something that's common amongst atheists and Marxists? Absolutely, it is. I wanted to share with you a piece or an excerpt from a piece that was written by Scott Robinson in 1979. And he's talking about the way in which Marxists approach different questions. And he calls the Marxists and Leninists a word. And I want you to pay attention to this word that he calls them. Let's see if I can't pull it up here. Okay, I don't know what happened to my mouse, but it makes it very difficult to drag and drop things. I think my daughter must have done something with it. So I'm trying to use the touchpad on my MacBook and I'm not having much success at all. Come on, bro. Every time I click it to try to drag it, it just opens it. Okay, here we go. There we go. Drop it. Okay, there it goes. So let me try to see if I can't. There it goes. Okay. So this is an excerpt from a piece that Scott Robinson wrote in 1979. And he says, quote, "As Marxist-Leninists, we often pay our lip service to being scientific, but to be scientific is not a mere knowledge of the classics. Marxist-Leninists, as scientists, must wage a continual battle against all tendencies toward complacency, against all encroachment of bourgeois ideology. And we must continually work to advance the science in correspondence with the changing material conditions." That's one of the things I want you to pay attention to. I'm going to read that last part again. We must continually work to advance the science in correspondence with the changing material conditions. That's important. We're going to get back to that. Thus, we must ask, is the concept of a thing scientific in the sense of it being a useful tool for analyzing the range of discriminatory social practices under capitalism. These questions must, it's supposed to say be, but it says he. These questions must be answered and their specific, okay. I was public school educated. These questions must be answered in their specificity with regard to the conditions and balance of class forces in the present U.S. social formation. So what is he saying here? Well, whenever you look at that sentence in the middle of this paragraph, basically he's saying as conditions change in this world in which we live, we have to have a scientific explanation for those changes. So that way we can be taken seriously. Because the fact of the matter is that to the extent that a person comes off as articulate and intellectual, people will begin paying attention to that person and taking what they say at face value. And this is why I tell people, look, don't believe me just because I said something. Actually, fact check me and do your research. I strongly encourage people to do that because I'm not trying to be anyone's leader. I'm not trying to be, your go-to guy anytime you have a question. And instead, and this is going to be part of the curriculum, the homeschool curriculum that I'm currently working on, where my encouragement to people is to teach you how to research, to teach you how to, what kind of answers to look for and what kind of questions to ask. These are the important things I think one must do in order to really develop a full understanding of our history. Because if you can understand where we've been, you can better understand where we're going. And you can better understand the individuals who are in the public eye, whether it be a social scientist, whether it be a social intellectual, whether it be a professor, a celebrity, a journalist, whatever the case may be, who's trying to disseminate information to sway public opinion. My encouragement and my hope for my kids and for, those who will, take part in the curriculum that we're building is that they understand how the world works. They understand how manipulation works. They understand how false narratives work, all to basically make them, in a sense, pawns of the state or to be placed in someone's control. And I firmly believe as a Christian, the only control that should be over you is that of the Holy Spirit. You should be moving by your own volition and not necessarily by the volition of, or the control rather, of someone, whether it be a politician or celebrity or whomever, who wishes to drive you down a road to what they see fit as a utopia, and not necessarily the utopia that the Bible talks about, which is heaven. But not to veer too far off course. So let's get back to the article. There's a couple things I wanted to share from that article before moving on. So let's see here. So this paragraph right here is another one that caught my eye because it goes back to what I was talking about earlier with regard to the real reason these folks or these leftists are advocating now for having more kids. That on the one hand, and then two, I think you should pay attention to this because these are the kind of conditions, these are the kind of terms that leftists are laying out if they are going to have more kids. He says here, this much we should be able to agree on. However, declining population growth really does pose existential challenges to America. And without more children, the country really does face a future that is less innovative, less wealthy, and less vibrant. And while liberals have every reason to look askance at conservative fear-mongering about population bust, the point of liberalism is, and this is an important part that you guys should pay attention to, the point of liberalism is, or should be, to create the conditions that allow people to freely live the lives they want to lead, to remove, whenever possible, the economic, political, or social obstacles in their way. The reality is that America has room for more children. It needs them to thrive. And most of all, people do want the freedom to choose the family sizes they desire, including larger ones. It's a future that progressives can and should help create. So what is he saying there? Specifically, whenever he's talking about the goal of liberalism is to remove these obstacles that exist in the way of the economy, social issues, whatever burdens that they say is an issue for, different classes or different ethnic groups or women or what have you. What they are trying to do is to eliminate the natural actions and reactions that come to pass in life and in the world. What do I mean by that? Well, the fact of the matter is, if you have sex with, if you're a man and you have sex with a woman, oftentimes the woman can become pregnant because that's a action and reaction. If you want to eat and have shelter and have clothes, you have to work. Traditionally speaking, you can't produce without working. If you go to a party and you have a little bit too much to drink and you decide that you want to drive home, there's a possibility that you can get into a car accident and that will cost you your life and possibly someone else's life as well. So there's natural actions and reactions to living in the world. Atheists, Marxist types, think it's unfair. They think that it's unfair that a person has to work to make a living for themselves. They think it's unfair that reproduction is the natural result of having sex. They think it's unfair that, fill in the blank. And so when they say that they want to eliminate these obstacles, what they're talking about is radically and fundamentally restructuring life and making it to where the things that are naturally the reaction to a certain action just simply don't exist anymore. Now, in order to bring such a world into pass, you have to have willing participants in the citizenry. And to the extent that individuals in the citizenry don't cooperate or isn't quite picking up what the Marxist and globalist types are putting down, those individuals, you'll find more and more, will be demonized and ostracized and tabooed and made fun of and so on and so forth. Because how dare you not believe or agree in the direction that we're trying to go in? Don't you care about poor people? Don't you care about women? Don't you care about the minority? And this is the kind of rhetoric that they use to get you to go along with their agenda. And so we've seen in the past what has been the fate of individuals who disagree with the Marxist globalist trajectory that a certain nation is going down. We saw it in Cuba, where individuals who were partial to Fidel Castro's predecessor, those individuals were executed in cold blood. The same happened in Russia. The same happened in China. to the extent that an individual tries to maintain some remnant or relic of life that smacks of capitalism, those individuals are looked upon as a problem that must be handled, that must be dealt away with. And so these Marxists, they are a very interesting bunch, because on the one hand, they want individuals who are participating in their agenda, but on the other hand, they want to basically execute, if you're a eugenicist, they want to execute individuals who they deem undesirable or who cannot contribute to this world that they're trying to build. And so I wanted to play a 1960s clip for you all, where they're talking about population control. And there's a golden nugget in there that I want you all to look out for. Let me know if you see it.
The United States alone, if it continues to grow at its present rate, will in 100 years reach a population of 1 billion, seriously threatening the quality of life for all levels of society. Dr. John Rock says,
a society which practices death control must at the same time practice birth control.
In fact, governments and private organizations all over the world have begun to work with the medical profession toward effective and acceptable family planning. Dr. Alan F. Guttmacher, president of Planned Parenthood World Population, says,
today, there's a highly developed technology of contraception, resulting in an increasingly wide range of effective and tested methods of fertility control.
The more traditional of these methods use not only mechanical barriers, but also a variety of spermicidal preparations. The orals interfere with the reproductive process at an earlier stage.
So you, of course, saw Planned Parenthood in that clip. Then it was called Planned Parenthood World Population, right? So they're a little bit more in your face about what their agenda was, weren't they? To control the population of the world. And of course, because Margaret Sanger, the mother of Planned Parenthood, was a Marxist, she had significant help on her side in terms of helping her to tone down her rhetoric and to, in a sense, make their agenda a little bit more discreet. That was what was going on. And it's amazing to me how many people today, they're not alarmed by this. And that's for a number of reasons. On the one hand, to the extent that younger people aren't alarmed by that clip or what Margaret Sanger's agenda was or what have you, is that over the past half century, I believe that there has been a lot done to desensitize the younger generations to where, because we don't have a moral basis from which we start from, it's difficult for us to fully understand whether something that is amoral is truly bad, right? We don't understand how it is bad for us. And even if we can understand that that thing is bad, we are convinced that, well, yeah, it's bad, but surely there's a justification for it. And so we try to find somewhere in our mind to justify that thing because surely it benefits someone somehow. And so we have this kind of utilitarian way in which we look at things as opposed to a deontological way of looking at things. Now, what's the difference between being utilitarian and deontological? Well, An individual who is deontological in the way they approach things is someone who respects duty above all things. So for them, the question when it comes to stealing, for example, is stealing right or wrong? The answer is always yes, or that it is wrong. Whereas the utilitarian person would say, well, I'm not convinced that stealing is wrong. My question isn't so much whether stealing is wrong. My question is, why did this person steal? And if there's an answer that the individual gives that tickles my fancy, in other words, an answer that I find to be satisfactory, then stealing is right for that individual at that time. And so hopefully I'm doing a good job explaining this. Where the deontological person asks whether a thing is right or wrong. The utilitarian person doesn't ask whether something is right or wrong, because there is no such thing as right and wrong in their mind. Rather, was it useful? Was lying useful? Was stealing useful for the end that the individual desired? So does the end justify the means? If the means is lying, if the means is stealing, if the means is being manipulative, if the means is controlling the population, because by having more children, that means less food, that means a larger carbon footprint, so on and so forth. To the utilitarian person, they think it's necessary for Planned Parenthood to do the things that Planned Parenthood has done historically. They think it's necessary for Fidel Castro to execute all of his political enemies, because what Fidel Castro was trying to build was something good. He was trying to build a communist country where everybody's provided for by the government, where everybody's literate because they're receiving a government education. These are good things that Fidel Castro wanted, says the Marxist. And so to the Marxist, to the utilitarian person, if the means is executing everybody who disagrees, that's actually justified. And so moving from a deontological kind of generation, would be the silent generation, the parent of the baby boomers. We then moved to a utilitarian generation as the baby boomers came of age, and they began to look at the world as a place where they indulge in self, as opposed to a place where they contribute to their families and be responsible human beings. And so from baby boomer generation on down to Generation Z, again, you have this embracing and indulging all the more into this kind of relative way of thinking, this relative way of reasoning, the subjective thing that they have going on. And so, again, I say all that to say this. It doesn't surprise me that whenever you lay out in black and white what the agenda of Planned Parenthood was, and is, to the extent that you lay that out for the average person, they're not swayed by it one way or the other. Because, again, we've been conditioned to think in a utilitarian way. We've been conditioned to, so there's that. And then on the other hand, there's the individual who may be alarmed by it, but at the same time, they think, well, I'm only one person. I can't do anything about it. It's kind of the way of the world. And so they're not really, fazed by it one way or the other. And I think I can be that person at times. But at the same time, I think that it's important to educate young people in particular, to make them aware of these things, because these are our future, community leaders. These are our future doctors, our future lawyers and judges and citizens, frankly. And to the extent that we can educate them and warn them of this trend toward globalism and the kind of propaganda that's aimed at them in particular to get them to do things that will ultimately end in their detriment. To the extent that you can warn them about these things and educate them about these things, you can, in a sense, slow the trend, slow the trajectory. And even if you can't stop it, your children will at least know how to guard themselves from it, and hopefully guard their children from it as well. The last thing I wanted to show you all from this piece here, and it's a long piece. Do go back and read it if you care to. Let's see here. He says, while Americans, let's see, let me share my screen with you. That might help. He says, while Americans are working later into life than they did decades ago, the reality is that an aging country is one that will have a dwindling number of young workers to support a growing number of elderly. Today, there are 3.5 working age adults to support every American eligible for Social Security. By 2060, that is projected to fall to 2.5 workers for every retiree. Social Security isn't a Ponzi scheme, but without enough young workers putting in payroll taxes, it can continue in its current form, or it can't continue in its current form. And so, again, what is he saying? He's saying that we need more kids to maintain these socialist policies that we have going. And we hope to ring in or usher in more social programs. And the only way we can sustain these social programs, these socialist programs, is to do so with young workers who are coming into the workforce. And so they find themselves in quite the fix. They find themselves in quite the conundrum. Because again, for the longest time, they've been arguing for population control, for reducing the number of births. This is what Darwinian evolution has set into motion, the survival of the fittest, or what they deem to be the fittest. They don't deem poor people to be the fittest. They don't deem individuals with disabilities to be the fittest. They don't even deem a lot of your college-educated adults to be the quote-unquote fittest. In fact, they look with disdain and pity at many of the individuals who go to college. College is not a barometer of who is truly gifted or not amongst us. It just simply isn't. Most of the people who go to college, well, let me not say what I was about to say. But the fact of the matter is, many people who go to college are actively learning history wrong, are actively learning about the world wrong. Some of the most wisest people I know, hell, some of the most smartest people I know have never been to college. But they love to do their own work with regard to researching, with regard to studying. Many of them have a trade or some kind of profession. So they have mechanical knowledge. That's some of the smartest people I know. And so, again, it's important to note that whenever you have these communist regimes and they begin executing their political enemies, some of the first people they execute are intellectuals who were on their side. Look this up if you don't believe me. Some of the first people they execute are intellectuals who are on their side, college-educated intellectuals who are on their side. Why do they do this? They do this because they know too much, some of them. Even if they don't know what they know too much. And once a communist government gets a foothold to the extent where they don't need you, they don't need your useful idiocy anymore because they got what they've been after. You were just useful to a certain degree. And to the extent that you're no longer needed, what can I do with you? You've been indoctrinated to believe that there's 86 different genders. What can I do with that in the real world? You've been indoctrinated to believe that you are a victim by the mere fact that you have a certain skin complexion. What can I do with you in the real world? You were good enough for me to, to spout your rhetoric on Facebook and on Instagram, to get people to agree with you, to get people to go along with the agenda, and to get people to vote against their own interests. You were good to that extent. But beyond that, once I get into power, once I am able to fixate and establish myself in power, you are no longer needed. Unless you're willing to pick up a gun in my army and point it in the direction of my political enemies, I do not need you, says the Marxist. They've said it historically. They've said it in Russia. They've said it in Cuba. They said it in Venezuela. They said it in China. They still continue to say it in China to this very day. One of the biggest enemies to a communist regime is the family. Remember that word? Prior to the 1960s, most families were intact, regardless of ethnicity. As a matter of fact, where's that clip? I'm going to play a clip for you guys.
What I think is most striking to us in retrospect is how really stable or quote-unquote middle class many minority families were in the 1950s. This middle class image of the family was surprisingly widespread during the 50s. That is, the overwhelming majority of black children were growing up in stable two-parent homes. The divorce rate compared to what it is now was relatively low. Your ideals of self-fulfillment were marriage, having your own house, having children that you might be able to send to college. For most Americans, I think those were the highest expectations they hoped for out of life. Needless to say, these are quite different from the levels of fulfillment that people who grew up later would have of their own lives.
So there you have it. Most families were intact, not just white families, but literally all families. Asian, Hispanic, Black, all families, for the most part, were intact prior to the 1960s. We understood what a family was. A family was a mother, a father, and children. That's what a family was. There was no guessing or any kind of imaginative work. Now, of course, you had exceptions. You had, children who were adopted. You had people who didn't have any families. Of course, there were exceptions to the rule. But for the most part, there was no confusion as to what a family was. It wasn't until, again, after the kind of looseness of the 60s, when you had all your social justice movements happening all at once, where you had these young folks that were challenging the narrative and the beliefs of the adult generation of that day. It wasn't until that happened where we began to shift how we think of, or what we think of, family. We started having less children, and we started having children later in life. The thing that people aspired to, young people aspired to, as they got older and were fixing to graduate from high school, they weren't aspiring any longer to start families, to start businesses, to basically be family men and family women. They weren't aspiring to being that anymore. Why weren't they aspiring to be that? Well, if you look at the cultural shifts around that time, rock and roll became cool. And so you got out of this kind of like, doo-wop, kind of Motown, kind of, Frank Sinatra-esque, kind of feel-good, music that glorified, in a sense, marriage and, wanting to be with the person, not necessarily having sex with the person, but just, I want to hold your hand or something of that nature. I think there is literally a song called I Want to Hold Your Hand. But you had this kind of clean music that, in a sense, reinforced marriage, reinforced the family, and rock and roll, in a sense, rebelled against that. And you saw the glorification of drug use as well. Jimi Hendrix encouraged us subconsciously to do drugs. Beatles, again, especially like their later stuff, encouraged drug use. Even if they didn't directly encourage drug use, it was certainly something that was done at their concerts, and there was definitely kind of inclinations to it in some of their lyrics. Again, you don't believe me? Go back and look at it. You saw movies that celebrated drug use. You saw the popularization of Cheech and Chong, for example. During the 70s, the blaxploitation films were encouraging the selling of drugs. And so why is it that we see in the 60s going into the 70s, all of a sudden, this vast popularization of drug use? So not only are you trying to get us to rebel against our adult generation as baby boomers, not only are you trying to get us to rebel against our adult generation, but you're also trying to get us drunk and high and confused, right? You want us, taking shrooms and dropping acid and smoking marijuana, just being high all the time. Why is that? Why are you trying to numb our minds and impair the way that we think? Because this is part and parcel to this kind of decadent self-indulging. How can you care for kids when you can't even care for yourself? Oh, and then in 1973, the Supreme Court makes a decision in the case of Roe v. Wade. I listened to that case, the oral argument for that case. I've listened to it round about 16 times. And anybody who listens to the oral argument and has ears knows that the case that was made on behalf of Roe was abysmal. It was just simply abysmal. And so it makes you wonder, why is it that these 9 Supreme Court justices, or 8, because I think one of them didn't decide in it, if I remember correctly. But why is it that, was it 7? My memory is a little shaky on it. But anyway, I know there's 9 Supreme Court justices on the court. I think that one person dissented and one person didn't vote at all, if I remember correctly. But those facts doesn't matter. The fact is, Roe v. Wade was decided in favor of Roe, and we've have close to 50 years of abortions that were had at the behest of such an abysmal case, at the behest of such an abysmal decision. And so what it did in the minds of many women is it gave them some kind of freedom. It gave them this impression and this atheistic worldview that they are equal to men. The Bible already guarantees equality between men and women, especially for those who are in Christ. Right? Now, what does equality mean and what doesn't it mean? Equality means that we're equal in terms of dignity, that we're equal in terms of the way in which God loves us and accepts us as his own, but not equal in terms of what our roles are. The fact of the matter is the world will never tell you that, because the world wants to lie to you, especially those who don't know God. But we are not equal in terms of what our roles are. We're not equal in terms of what our talents and our skills are. We're not equal in terms of what we can and cannot do. We're not. But that's a beautiful thing, to not be equal on those fronts. I was just talking to my son this evening, where he was asking me, why does mom do this way, and why do you do that way? And what he was asking about was a reflection more of our different sex makeups, me being a man, my wife being a woman. I think he was asking about some way in which we discipline or something like that. And my son, who's all of 9 years old, said, Dad, you tend to be more firm, and mom tends to be more gentle. And I said, well, son, this is just a difference in the fact that your mother is a woman and I'm a man. But you need both of those in your life. You need the gentle nurturer that is your mother, and you need the firm disciplinarian that is your father. You need both of those. God knew what he was doing when he gave you that balance in your life. He knew what he was doing, and he knew that it would help foster you into becoming a responsible adult. And it is my prayer, son, that I'm exemplifying what a father is in your life. So that way, when you are a father, you know how to do it. It's important also, son, that I exemplify to you how a man must love his wife, how he must treat his wife, how he must treat his children. Because one day, son, maybe you will be a father, and you'll know how to do it because you saw your dad doing it. So these are the things that are important, but it doesn't negate, nor does it trump what mom does, because we are both needed in the lives of our children while we raise them. Would I be able to do the things I do as a father if I was mentally impaired due to constant drug use? Would I be able to be a good father if I was busy chasing fame and trying to find myself, trying to travel and explore the world while neglecting my kids? No, it's not wrong to travel. I wish people would travel within their what their budget allows them to. But you see a lot of people traveling while neglecting other things. Also, they can post pictures on Facebook and Instagram to show you a side of themselves that's not real. And so we're busy chasing imagery than we are in actually being present in the now, taking care of our personal responsibilities and being there for those who we brought into this world or those who we've made commitments to. But most of us can't even do that. We can't even make the commitments we need to make. And so everything is in disarray. Everything is out of order because we've been conditioned to believe that disorder is okay. But it's not okay. Naturally, in this flesh, we can't be perfect, but we have a God who is perfect. And we have Christ who came to earth and showed us what perfection is. And he made a gift for us that's free, but it costs us our lives. And so for me, I can look at the life that God requires of those of us who are born again versus the life that many of the baby boomers were tempted by in the 1960s, during the height of rock and roll, during the height of second wave feminism, during the height of black militancy, during the height of radical socialism on campus, from which came Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and John Kerry and Al Gore and many of your Republican presidents as well, and congressmen and senators, Mitt Romney being one of them. The life that they want for us is that of servitude to the state, that of one where we depend on the government for all of our provisions. And so, to the extent that we live such a life, to the extent that we go down such a road, we begin to have less and less character. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that work builds character. Having to figure it out, that builds character. Being in a position where you have to be resourceful, otherwise it's not going to happen, that builds character and ingenuity and intuitiveness. And not only that, but it builds a neighborly bond too. Because to the extent that you're able to overcome something with the help of your immediate neighbors, that builds a trust bond. But again, because of the road that we're currently going down, where there's a huge push for globalism incrementally by way of socialism or democratic socialism, whatever you want to call it, it all leads to the same dreary path or dreary future. It just does. I'm starting to see more and more people pull their kids out of public school. This is happening on an annual basis. But of course, those numbers aren't being reported on. Why aren't those numbers being reported on? Well, it's counterproductive to the statist agenda, because they want as many kids as possible in the public school system. And to the extent that they tell you that the number of people who are homeschooling their kids is trending upward, to the extent that they tell you that, that's going to lead people to asking questions. Well, why is that? Do I need to consider putting my kids in homeschool? Do I need to consider giving my kids a classical education? They don't want to sound the alarm because they know it will work against them. They know it will work against their agenda. And why would you want the government educating your kids to begin with? I know the government isn't in the classroom, right? But many teachers are teaching what they're being told to teach. It's rare that educators have the kind of autonomy to really take their children's education, their students' education, into their own hands and teach them something that's really worthwhile, something that's really going to prepare them to be a responsible adult. Very rarely is such breathing room allotted to our educators. Many of them are just kind of going through their motions, teaching what they've been told to teach. And I would also venture to say that many of them don't understand that what they're doing is gearing up toward a kind of, or basically turning out their students to be statists. Because if you engage them on that conversation or that discussion, many of them either don't want to have it, or they will say, well, that's not what's happening. I mean, I hear you. I hear that you're saying that that's not what's happening. But numbers don't lie. Numbers simply do not lie. There was a poll done recently. I wish I had it here because I would post it on my screen. But there was a poll done recently where it asked young folks under the age of 30, which do they have a more favorable view to, socialism or capitalism? The majority of young people said socialism. In fact, I think the number was higher today than in the 60s, when everyone thought that a socialist revolution was afoot, especially after the assassination of Martin Luther King. They didn't get their fast-paced socialist revolution, but what they did do is that many of those young folks graduated from college and they went and got jobs in various professions in Hollywood, in tech, in corporate America, in universities and academia. They got jobs in these different professions and they worked themselves up the ranks to being leaders in these professions. And it is from those positions today that they are, in a sense, using those professions to shape public opinion into this kind of leftism, Marxism, globalism. This is the very reason why many corporations go along with what we know to be just utterly abysmal, rather than fighting against it. It's very rare that somebody who's part of a corporation or in Hollywood or what have you speak out against the agenda that is going on right now. I recall recently when the president or owner of Home Depot spoke out and said nobody wants to work anymore. A lot of the people who we hire to work at our Home Depot facilities just simply don't want to work, and there's an abysmally high turnover rate because nobody these days wants to work anymore. And he went on to compare socialism to capitalism, decrying socialism and lauding capitalism. And I thought to myself, wow, we have someone from corporate America speaking out against socialism. That's very rare to see, because it is. It just is. Let's see here. Let's play this other one. If I can find it. Is this it?
In addition to the office of the private physician, this kind of guidance is offered in Planned Parenthood clinics and more in the clinics of public hospitals.
Literature here, you can take it home, discuss it with your husband. If you've made up your mind when you are at home, please call the clinic back and change your postpartum appointment.
Lack of birth control information has been a primary cause of excessive multiparity, especially among the poor.
This is the female reproductive organ. This is the womb or the uterus where the baby normally grows.
Every serious study undertaken indicates that members of all socioeconomic groups in the United States, regardless of race or national background, would prefer to have families of limited size and do make use of family planning services when they are available.
Well, I don't want no more children. I think that's more than enough.
Your husband...
So did you hear? Did you hear what the narrator just said? Well, we polled, all these women, and what we found is that, they don't actually want to have a lot of children. It's one of those things where it's something that people aren't even thinking about until a pollster comes out of nowhere and are asking them all these pressing questions, and you think. And you start thinking about something that you actually never quite thought about before, because all your life you knew that, okay, one day I want to get older and have a family and have kids, and there was really no thought as to how many kids you would have. In fact, this whole question of how many kids do you want is a fairly recent phenomenon. I mean, think about it. I myself, my dad, on my paternal side of the family, I have 13 aunts and uncles. And on my mom's side of the family, my maternal side of the family, I have 8 aunts and uncles. My grandfather on my dad's side was an only child, but that was because after he was born, my grandmother had some issues and she had a number of miscarriages. And so she wasn't able to have more children. But back on my maternal side, my grandmother and grandfather had a good number of siblings. And so this whole idea of having kids, because that's what married couples do, was something that existed for centuries. And it wasn't until, again, halfway through the 20th century and Western culture, as this kind of eugenics agenda became more advanced and more sophisticated, where this reasoning subtly crept into national conversations and conversations that we have amongst ourselves and amongst our loved ones of, well, how many kids do you want when you grow up, and how many kids do you want, or I want to have this many kids, and I want to have that many kids, and I want to live in this house, in this town at this corner, and I want to do this, and my husband's going to do that, and basically family planning. Now, this term family planning doesn't sound like anything bad or negative on its face, but the whole concept of it was bred out of the eugenics movement. Family planning, the ability or the idea that you can actually plan out your life. My question for anyone who's watching right now is, out of all the long-term plans that you set for yourself, how many of them have worked out to a T? Now, that's not to say that you can't set goals, but I think that there's a difference between setting goals for yourself in your life and actually planning out to a T your life. And let's say that you did fulfill all the things and you were able to follow the strict plan that you set out for yourself. What was all of it for in the end? Especially if you did it at the expense of giving your life to God. Because there's a certain degree of spontaneity that goes along with being a born-again believer. Let me turn that up. I feel like my audio is low. There's a certain degree of spontaneity that goes along with being a believer. Because you understand that you're not to be of the world, you're merely to be in it. And so there's a line, and a very fine line, between being responsible and hoarding up things in your storage, if that makes sense. Your proverbial storage. What do I mean by that? Well, it's good to be responsible. For me, I'm gearing up to be able to invest in things, to be able to invest in real estate, and to, in a sense, ensure that whenever this body of mine is unable to physically work anymore, I don't have to depend on the government or someone else to take care of me, because I've made smart financial decisions to be able to not be a burden on anyone, if that makes sense. I'm also wanting to position my kids in such a way that they can be off to a good start whenever they set out to make their own way as well. So I want to send them off with some sort of a blessing, some kind of physical blessing. So that's called being responsible. That's called being a good steward of that which you have, right? But there's a difference between setting goals and just being responsible, and actually making decisions with the thought in mind that if you don't follow this plan to an exact T, then that's just the most worrisome thing ever. Because who by worrying can add a single day to their life? And that's one of those things that I'm constantly having to talk to my wife about, because she can tend to be a worrier. She tends to worry sometimes. And I have to reassure her, look, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. I want to do what I can, and, as a man, to ensure that that thing is taken care of. But even if I wasn't able to, because of, whatever emergency or whatever came up, it'll still be fine, because this too will pass, and God still sits on the throne. Does that mean that I act negligently? Does that mean that I am not responsible? No. But there's a balance that one must carry with themselves, if that makes sense. I feel like I've strayed from the original thought, but let's get back to this point, or this video here.
No problem.
No, we have all 6.
Family planning services when they are available.
Well, I don't want no more children. I think that's more than enough.
Your husband agrees?
Yes,
Yeah, I think you have plenty.
We did want a little girl, being that we have all 6 boys.
Oh, my gosh.
But, well, that's just too much anyway. We'll just have to do without that girl.
How have you been feeling since the baby was born?
Okay.
No problem?
No problem.
When you were upstairs, did you go to the lectures about...
Yes, I did,
And Mrs. Fredericks talked to you about the various methods that we have available?
Yes, she did. She talked to us about the different ways that they could help us in this program.
Did you find one that seemed to interest you?
So this actually makes me very sad. It really does, because you have this woman here. She's talking about, well, we have the 6 boys and we wanted a girl too, but, I guess we'll just have to not have that girl. And the doctor's like, okay, well, next subject. So did you listen to the lectures upstairs from our Planned Parenthood representatives? Are you now aware of all the different, contraceptives you can take, and you can take the pills, and you can take this, and you can take that. And so they're getting ready to, in a sense, sterilize this woman, and thus crashing all of her aspirations of being a mother with children, and a daughter in particular. Now, I spoke earlier about, well, this idea of family planning, right? This idea of, well, when I get older, I'm going to have X amount of kids. How it's a new phenomenon. Am I saying that that's wrong in itself? Not entirely. It's not wrong to say when I grow older, I want to have 2 kids or what have you. Because, as children, there's a lot of things that you think you're going to do when you get older. However, what we see happening with Planned Parenthood in this video, and what we've seen happening with the kind of Marxist agenda that has played out over the course of the last century, is basically acting on this notion, or this agenda to, in a sense, be God, and to convince people that you can be God, right? So we've gone from basically a childhood desire to get older and have X amount of kids, to actually telling the children, well, yeah, you can actually do that. You can, join Planned Parenthood, or you can get with a Planned Parenthood representative, and they can help you plan out. And again, Planned Parenthood is getting access to kids from a very early age these days. So by the time you're a young teenager, they're already plugging you up with a Planned Parenthood representative, and are telling you that you can actually see this person without your parents' knowledge, to help plan your future as a mother or father. And so, isn't it funny? I don't think it's funny, but isn't it interesting how these Marxist types are taking these innocent, kind of meaningless child desires, and are getting access to the kids at a very early age, and trying to, in a sense, hold them to these meaningless childhood desires. The same is true with quote unquote transgenderism. It used to be, when I was in school, if a girl wore pants and she liked to play soccer at recess, and she liked to, get down and dirty with the best of the boys in terms of, roughhousing and playing sports and all the things, we used to call her a tomboy. not not in a sense of making fun of her, but in a sense of just saying like, oh, you like to do things that boys like doing, and you like to, dress a certain way or what have you. It never occurred to us that she wants to be a boy. It never occurred to us that she was a transgender. Many of the girls I knew in school who were tomboys are today happily married with kids and are very feminine. And so it was something that they kind of grew out of, that tomboy face. These days, it's not the case. These days, girls are encouraged to become lesbians. Boys are encouraged to be gay or transgender. You now see parents, well, whenever, little Johnny was 3, he said he wanted to be a girl because he saw his sister putting on makeup one day. And so this is my daughter now. Despicable is what that is. And so again, who is peddling this rhetoric that we must turn these little meaningless, innocent childhood, things into established facts that determine the rest of that child's life, where we're traumatizing them along the way? I think it's ridiculous. Let's see here. I cut this video off, so I'm just going to keep playing it from where it was.
Have you seen one of the loops?
Yes, we've seen them. I've seen one when I was in the hospital.
They're just made out of plastic, and we straighten them out in this fashion to put it in, and then it just automatically snaps back in its little loop shape. And the white part of the loop stays inside the uterus or the womb like this, with the threads coming out through the mouth of the uterus into the top of the vagina. And I just sort of like to have you feel these threads so that you know what they're like. And the loop here too, just feel this. When you examine yourself, as long as you can feel just the threads, everything's all right. There are some problems with the loop, and you have to understand about this before we get started, or you might get discouraged. But, for instance, there's liable to be some cramping, like do you have cramps with your menstrual period?
Not usually, not unless I've been working a little hard before, but otherwise I have pretty good menstrual
There's liable to be
periods.
some cramping for, some women tell us 2 or 3 hours, some say 2 or 3 days. Some say they have no problems at all. For a while after the loop's been put in, just a little vague sort of cramping feeling low in your abdomen. Your first few periods that you have, your menstruation, is likely to be quite heavy enough to worry you a little bit. But this is expected, and that's why I want to tell you about it, so it doesn't scare you.
Success depends largely upon the care with which the physician explains the chosen method and the degree to which he responds to the needs and concerns of each particular patient.
This is a safe method. You're not worried about that, are you?
No. I have a girlfriend say you could get cancer.
Well, no, that's not true.
I know the nurse explained it to us when she
You
talked
can
to us
get cancer,
upstairs.
but this doesn't make the chances any greater. You still have the same chances that any other woman has.
Well, I didn't believe that. And plus, I
And
read a little bit about it in
one of the advantages of coming to see us every year is we always do the cancer test, of course, and we find it at the earliest possible moment.
And if I want to have a baby later, can it be taken out?
Yes, you just take this out, and then you're perfectly easy to become pregnant again.
So she asked him, if I wanted to have a baby later, can I just can I be taken off of this contraceptive or medication or whatever it was that they are about to put this poor lady on? He's like, yeah, of course, whenever you feel like you're ready to have kids, just come to us and we'll take it out of you or what have you. In many cases, that has been a lie. In many cases, that has been a lie. And in fact, it's so interesting how, to the extent that you have a lot of women who are on birth control, they're taking the pills or what have you, it's messing with them mentally. It's messing with them in terms of depression and in terms of their temper. But we're not talking about that. Oh, you're a man. You're not supposed to talk about that. Let women deal with women's issues. I mean, the fact of the matter is that in their quest to control the population, they have many casualties. Whether you're talking about women's depression, whether you're talking about, and that's not just depression in terms of what the medication does to the woman, but depression in terms of getting to a certain age and realizing I've done all this traveling, I've pursued my career, but I haven't been able to nail down a consistent relationship, start a family, and have kids, and I'm all of 45 years old, and my time is running out, and I might die alone. There's depression that comes from that. But you were told all your life that you're an independent woman and that you should be empowered, and there's no man who's better than you, and you can do stuff just like men can do them, and all these different things. Men are weaker. I'm not talking about physically. I'm talking about mentally as a result of this kind of agenda that's being pushed and has been pushed. Men are, in a sense, castrated. It's pathetic, is what it is. I have a plumbing company, and I hired this young man one time, and we were talking because there's a shortage of labor, of competent labor, and I don't even want to just say competent labor. I can also include a shortage of people who are willing to learn a trade, right? Because the fact is, in Western culture, in Western society, not even Western society, just in the world, it's important to know how to use these. It's important to know how to build. It's important to know how to design sustaining systems, dynamic systems. It's important to do that, to build a solid foundation on which to build a house or a building. It's important to know how to control the climate within that structure, within that building, so that people in there don't freeze to death or sweat their, I was about to say something probably inappropriate, but not sweat. It's important to know how to build aircraft that can fly, commercial liners that can fly and get people to their destination safely. Like, these things are important. But the fact of the matter is, as part of this agenda to kill masculinity, to blur the lines between male and female, to ring in this globalist agenda, as part of this, you have to, in a sense, rewire people. And people are being rewired, men in particular, to not fulfill their obligations to sustaining life in the world. So I was talking to this young man who I hired, and I was like, hey, do you have any friends who, are interested in learning the trade and coming to work? And he said, Chad, I'm going to be honest with you. I already asked my friends. I have 5 good friends who I hang out with on the weekends. And they all work at, gas stations or a trampoline park one of them works at, and the other works at, Lego store. The other works at Jiffy Lube, which is a oil changing garage. He said, Chad, I already asked all of them, and all of them said, ugh, plumbing. I want to get involved in plumbing. That's nasty. Then you mention the money that you can make as a plumber and how you can ultimately start your own business and be charging your own prices and be making profit around $4,000 a week. Ugh, I just don't want to deal with plumbing. That's nasty. So first and foremost, that shows the kind of retardation with which these individuals are suffering. Because if you know anything about trades, you'll know that as a plumber, it's very rare that you're dealing with anything quote unquote nasty, especially if you're doing new construction. All you're doing is building the plumbing aspect of this building. That means running pipes through the walls and under the ground and the ceiling and such and so forth. And not only that, but as a plumber, you can actually pigeonhole yourself into only doing one thing. I know plumbers who make pretty good money off of doing nothing but testing backflow systems, which is very clean work. There's nothing nasty about it. And in fact, some of the highest earners in the plumbing industry are the ones who deal with the quote unquote nasty stuff. But I mean, for me, I don't know about you guys watching, but for me, it's just hard to imagine a grown man not wanting to do work because it's nasty and icky. Again, this is the rewiring of human beings today. How we are, in a sense, being trained to believe that if something makes us feel kind of gross or if something is hard, then we shouldn't have to do it. We shouldn't have to deal with it. It should be somebody else's problem. Bear with me one quick second, guys. I'm going to get this camera back up and rolling. So it's unfortunate the state in which many of our men are in today. And I struggle to even call them that, men. I struggle to do it because we're not really we're not really living up to the title. We're just not. And I know I talk about feminism a lot and how feminism lied to women for decades and how, there's nothing worse than the quote unquote modern woman. That's not to say that there's nothing worse than women. I'm not saying that. Women are useful. Women are loved by God and they're to be cherished by us. The world needs women. It just does. And they're to be respected. They're to be honored. They are. But there's nothing worse than the modern woman in the same way that there's nothing worse than the modern man. The modern woman who believes that she shouldn't have to be a mother and she shouldn't have to be a nurturer and a caretaker. She shouldn't have to be feminine. She should be able to work 9 to 5 every day. Never mind the fact that she has kids. Never mind the fact that she has people who need her at home. She shouldn't feel guilted about that. She should be able to go and make her way in the workforce. And as far as the man is concerned, he shouldn't feel like he needs to work to provide for his family. He shouldn't feel like all of the burden is on him. He shouldn't feel like that. He should be able to have his wife also pull her weight in terms of working in the workforce so they can have enough money to pay the mortgage while their kids be educated in public indoctrination mills. Again, this is a state in which we find ourselves. And so no wonder people aren't having kids. because they find life to be very demanding in a sense, especially when you include inflation and things of that nature. But when you have each other, you find a way to make it work. Whenever my wife decided to stay home, because I've been trying to get her out of the workforce and saying, hey, you don't need to be in the workforce. Why don't you stay home and, homeschool the kids and I'll provide. By the time she agreed to do that, we weren't making a lot of money. We weren't doing that great financially, but we understood having children and growing our family was something that we wanted to do. And so shortly after the birth of my second son, she decided to stay home. And that was one of the best decisions for our family. By the time we had baby number 3 and 4, she was already in full swing, a full-time stay-at-home mother. And I can see in my kids the benefits of having a dad who works and provides for their family and a mother who stays home, nurtures them, educates them, cares for them, loves them. That's not to say that if you are a mother who works every day, you don't love your children. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not trying to posture myself as better than you or my wife is better than you. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that your kids need you. They do. There's a reason why God entrusted you, or them to you, rather. There's a reason for that. This world is trying to pull you away from that. This world is trying to make you believe that you have no choice but to be away from them. This world is trying to make you believe that they're going to be okay. Never mind the fact that they're only in your home, traditionally speaking, for 18 years. In other words, you spend more time in life, on average, as an adult than you do as a kid. And so the first decade or two of your life are those foundational years. And if you're spending that time more away from your kids than you are with them, then something else, you can rest assured, is contributing to their foundation. Why not let it be you? Why not let it be you? Why does it have to be daycare? Why does it have to be public school? The same school that's governed by a government who's already demonstrated its incompetency and its nefariousness. It misallocates money on purpose, sends money to fund countries and wars that we don't belong in. It does and operates in a lot of backroom deals, enriching the politicians. The very reason why by the time Barack Obama finished his second term, he was $40 million richer. A politician worth over $40 million? How does that happen? How does that happen? And he's not the only one. Washington, D.C. is crawling with such corrupt politicians. Your state capitals are crawling with corrupt politicians. And we entrust these people to dictate the curriculum that our kids are receiving in our public schools? Come on. In the foundational years of your children, nobody, and I do mean nobody, should have a greater influence than you. And friends, we must not forsake our meeting together. No, we shouldn't. I'm guilty of this. I haven't been as active in my church as I should be. And so in a real sense, I'm preaching to the choir here. But apart from your immediate family, the family that's supposed to have the biggest impression on you and your family as a Christian is that of your church family. We mustn't forsake our assembling together as the people of God, there to inspire one another, to edify one another, to grow with one another, and to correct. We don't look at church that way anymore. We look at it as a kind of social club whereby we meet on Sundays to hear some seminary educated pastor tell us about what he was studying that week. And there's such a huge disconnect from the actual real issues that are going on in the culture, going on in our immediate world, things that we as the people of God aren't quite sure what to do with or what to do about, and how and what saith the Lord on this particular subject. And so for many of us, going to church is nothing more than a ritualistic thing, a ceremonial thing where we check a box and we show up, we hear a word, we forget it. By the time we get home that Sunday evening, we go and watch some kind of sports game on television, and then we proceed the following day with our week as usual. Nothing changed, no reverence for God, no reverence for his word, no impression by his word on our lives and how we show up for our loved ones and friends and the multiple various facets in which we find ourselves in life. There's no such thing as a church family anymore. There's just pastors who we like to listen to from time to time and like to feel good about, but to the extent that we're challenged or convicted to live sanctified lives for our God, we retreat. And so it becomes all the more easier to capitulate and to give in to life according to the way in which the world says it ought to be lived. And so I digress. Let me finish this clip before I go on any further. I'll continue it in its entirety, if I can drag it. Okay, here I
go. This is a safe method. You're not worried about that, are you?
No. I have a girlfriend say you could get cancer.
Well, no, that's not true.
I know the nurse explained it to us when she
You
talked to
can
us
get
upstairs.
cancer, but this doesn't make the chances any greater. You still have the same chances that any other woman has.
Well, I didn't believe that. And plus, I read a little bit about it.
One of the advantages of coming to see us every year is we always do the cancer test, of course, and we find it at the earliest possible moment.
And if I want to have a baby later, can it be taken out?
Yes, you just take this out, and then you're perfectly easy to become pregnant again.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, of course, with the pills, too. No. No matter whether your period lasts 2 days, or 7 days, or 4 days, you always start taking your pills on day 5. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The day that you start taking your pills is not determined by when your period stops. It's determined by when your period starts. It's always 5 days after the first day of bleeding. Okay? So your period could stop here, or here, or here, or here, or maybe even here, but you still start the pills on day 5. Now, the pills are taken 1 pill a day every night. The nighttime is the best time to take them. For 20 days in a row.
My heart grieves for those women. It really does. My heart grieves for those women. This was in 1963. This video was in 1963 by what was then known as Planned Parenthood World Population. That was their formal name. That was their exclusive name. And all of these women are receiving misinformation from a man with a tight haircut, wearing a white coat, sounding authoritative while also sounding caring. Oh, but my girlfriend said that, I can get cancer if I put this contraption inside of me. Oh, no, she didn't know what she was talking about. Come on now. The fact is, there's a lot of things that can give you cancer. We later found out. The cigar I'm smoking can give you cancer. But again, in their quest to control population, it didn't matter. These women's lives didn't matter. The lives of their children didn't matter. What mattered was their agenda to control the population, which was in their name at the time that video was recorded. It's only recently, over the past 20 or 30 years, that they began, or decided rather, to really reinvent themselves as being just a family planning organization. Oh, abortion is only 2% of all of our functions that we do at Planned Parenthood. Really? Really? So again, to take it back to the beginning of this live, I shared with you all a article that was written in Vox magazine, or whatever the publication is, whether they're a digital magazine or whatever. I shared with you a article that was written, and the title of it was something along the lines of, in spite of climate change, you can still have children. And the article is written by a liberal, a self-described liberal. And his point is that even though climate change is a real threat, there's progress that is being made to turn the tide of climate change. And so you can be comforted by the fact that you can now start having children. But the fact of the matter is that it's not so much that there are real strides being made to turn the tide of climate change, because it was never real to begin with. What they're trying to do is, in a sense, backtrack on some gains that they've made over the past half century with regard to invoking a kind of fear in you, that the planet is being destroyed due to climate change. They're trying to roll back some of the gains that they made in terms of convincing you that it's morally wrong to have kids. They're trying to roll back this rhetoric that they've peddled over the past half century, that it's all about you and you can indulge in self, and that in itself being one of the reasons why people are having less and less children. They're trying to roll all this back. But why are they trying to roll it back? They're trying to roll it back once again because they recognize that all of these socialist programs that they have implemented from the FDR administration to now with Joe Biden and everything in between, they understand that you need young people getting into the workforce in order to sustain the existence and the growth of these social programs. And if you don't have young people to take up the baton, those social programs are in trouble. And the fact of the matter is, all of these social programs have been in trouble for a very long time. And the reason why leftists atheists, Marxists, globalists, whatever you want to call them, the reason why they change the narrative, like changing their underwear ever so often, goes right back to what Mr. Scott Robinson explained, that depending on the immediate need or the changing in conditions, Marxist-Leninists, who Scott says are scientists, they, in a sense, shift their rhetoric in order to fit the immediate concerns of their day. I'm going to put that quote back up here for you all. Let me see here. Scott Robinson. As Marxist-Leninists, we often pay our lip service to being scientific. But to be scientific is not a mere knowledge of the classics. Marxist-Leninists, as scientists, must wage a continual battle against all tendencies toward complacency, against all encroachment of bourgeois ideology, and we must continually work to advance the science in correspondence with the changing material conditions. And so it used to be that the narrative was, oh, the world's overpopulated, there's too many minorities, there's too many dumb people, we need to control the population because there's too many people, right? That's what the narrative used to be. And this is at a time when Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, all of that was on the up and up. They did a very good job marketing those programs, those social programs. Now that those social programs are running out of money, we have to change the narrative to fit the changing material conditions. He goes on to say, thus we must ask, is the concept of a thing scientific in the sense of it being a useful tool for analyzing the range of discriminatory social practices under capitalism? These questions must be answered in their specificity with regard to the conditions and balance of class forces in the present U.S. social formation. And so what is old boy doing? What he's doing is telling you their playbook. He calls Marxist-Leninists scientists. In other words, they deal with everything on a scientific basis. They think that everything, or they see everything as explainable, and to the extent that they can explain things in a sophisticated way to folks who are none the wiser, they can begin to sell whatever action they need for people to do in order to turn the tide of that which they say is a crisis. And so it used to be the notion that people are starving and this is a crisis, therefore we need government programs to feed people. And so they were able to get people to go along with the programs after implementing the programs into law. Look up Cloward and Piven. And then we find ourselves now where these programs are running out of money. And so they're starting to roll back some of their narrative with regard to childbearing and saying, you know what, actually go ahead and have kids because we don't know how we're going to sustain these programs anymore. So this is the article, once again, for those of you who are interested. You see here this bird with all kinds of trash on it, I guess due to climate change, delivering a baby to this biracial couple. That's the picture that they have on the cover. And the title of it is, Yes, You Can Have Kids and Fight Climate Change at the Same Time, written by Brian Walsh. And I want to point this out one more time, but it's funny to me how in this very first paragraph, he opens it, let's get this out of the way. I am not here to tell you to have children. I'm not your mother or your mother-in-law. I'm not the college classmate who posts endless photos of their prodigy on Instagram. I'm not your priest, your pastor, your rabbi, or your imam. I'm not going to tell you about the joy you'll harvest as a parent or all the fun you'll pay in recompense. Have a Nick Cannon-sized family. Don't have any kids at all, whatever, it's your life. So he sets the tone by trying to differentiate himself against particularly individuals who are quote unquote spiritual leaders. And he's trying to basically say that, look, these people are quacks. I'm not one of them. I'm not coming at you from a spiritual perspective. I'm coming at you from a scientific perspective. Remember that word scientific? Used by none other than the great communist Scott Robinson that I shared with you earlier about how we, as Marxist-Leninists, we change the rhetoric depending on the changing world conditions. This is what Brian Walsh is doing in this first paragraph by differentiating himself against the spiritual leaders, quote unquote. So after he's telling you, I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life, he then spends the rest of this very long article telling you exactly how to live your life. And then, of course, you see the bold letters that tops each paragraph. You see this one here. We actually do need more kids. Right there. You see that? Then you scroll down. And then we actually do want more kids. Interesting. It's not what you've been saying since Roe v. Wade, but I digress. And then that's the end. But yeah, he spends this whole article telling you that we actually need more kids. But hey, it's okay because he's arguing from a quote unquote scientific perspective and not so much a spiritual one. Right? I hope all that made sense. So anyway, hopefully this live went well in terms of its latency with regard to the audio, with regard to the video. Again, typically my lives haven't done very well in terms of those departments, simply because I recently found out that the issue all along has been my internet. I didn't realize that the internet that I had was the most basic package, and so I think I was operating at like 300 megabytes per second or something like that. So after I found that out, I immediately called my internet provider and said, look, I want the best possible internet for my area that we have. And after about 5 minutes on the phone, they were able to provide me with that. So hopefully that worked out. And I do feel bad for all the people who I was interviewed by on their platforms and my, pictures coming through all ghetto. I also feel bad for the individuals who I have had on my YouTube channel who have had to suffer through me trying to get my my live into gear. So hopefully that issue is resolved now with this newer, faster internet. Without further ado, I think I am going to leave it there. I wanted to go through the comments, but it's already 11:50 Central, and I got to get up early. So I'll do this again tomorrow, I think, and I'm going to be more interactive with the comment section. So hopefully you guys return for that. But anyway, love you all. Have a good night.